morning or afternoon. I'm late today. I had to do some things this morning. I was going to cook breakfast for my kids, and they opted for unusual bowls for their cereal this morning. And we are picky about the cereal. We shouldn't eat cereal, but what can you do? All right, guys. Yesterday's chapter was a doozy. It was awesome. I loved reading it. I'm looking forward to chapter 4. It's a long one, too, so I'm going to just dive right in and look forward to seeing who joins me today. All right, the doors of perception, the CIA's Psychedelic Revolution. Look at those hippie dippies. Ooh. What a time to be alive it must have been. And you think about the mindset and how people thought it was the worst time back then with the Vietnam War and civil unrest and so forth. And look where we are now. History repeating itself. Let me know who you are, who's on with me. This being a book club, I do try to stay on top of comments and so forth. And the doors of perception, the CIA Psychedelic Revolution. I think I already read that. For the opening of this chapter, I want to refer the reader to an excellent article by Michael Mendocino, The Frankfurt School and Political Correctness. He writes, the simmering unrest on campus in 1960 might well to have passed or had a positive outcome were it not for the traumatic decapitation of the nation through the Kennedy assassination, plus the simultaneous introduction of widespread drug use. Drugs had always been an analytical tool of the 19th century romantics, like the French symbolists who were popular among the European and American bohemian fringe well into the post-World War II period. But in the second half of the 1950s, the CIA and allied intelligence services began extensive experimentation with the hallucinogen LSD to investigate its potential for social control. Jonathan from Cincinnati. Amazing. Thank you for saying that, and tell your wife hi. Oh, I love that. Cincinnati. All right. Second half. Okay. And they were intelligence services began extensive experimentation with the hallucinogen LSD to investigate its potential for social control. It has now been documented that millions of doses of the chemical were produced and disseminated under the aegis of the CIA Operation MKUltra. LSD became the drug of choice within the agency itself, slowly making its way into academia, and then subsequently, recently, into Silicon Valley. They were calling it the wonder drug, and from there into society at large. In fact, I hid those videos, but I documented my trip through experimenting with self-medication, and I used microdosing. I was having complex PTSD symptoms. I had lots of things to overcome, and I used cannabis in macro doses. Some would say heroic doses. I was using the Phoenix Tears stuff. I can't talk about this stuff. I just got monetized, so I'm not sure if they'll pull my video. We'll see, I guess. I don't know if you guys seen my short where Baron got his pulled after he posted a live stream, and then they blurred his face and everything. Anyway, I don't use illicit substances anymore, but I definitely feel like I was able to heal some of I had a traumatic brain injury as well, and I feel as though I was able to heal my brains with, excuse me, psilocybin and cannabis, but I don't think it should be widely used recreationally. So, for instance, it was the OSS Research and Analysis Branch veteran Gregory Bateson who turned on the beat poet Allen Ginsberg to the U.S. Navy LSD experiment in Palo Alto, California. Not only Ginsberg, but novelist Ken Kesey and the original members of the Grateful Dead rock group opened the doors of perception courtesy of the Navy. Many young people became deadheads. Did I say people? I meant people. I was going to just glaze over that, but thank you. As I stumble and stutter and sneeze. All right. Many young people became deadheads following the Grateful Dead on tour. Veteran investigative journalist Jim Keith writes, quote, an FBI internal memo from 1968 mentions the employment of the Grateful Dead as an avenue to channel youth dissent and rebellion into more benign and non-threatening directions. They performed a vital service in distracting many young persons into drugs and mysticism rather than politics. Oh, gosh. The way they use our strengths against us and the way they subvert any ability for us to make a difference, like the protests these days. And I went to a BLM protest like a month deep into COVID lockdown. And I've talked about this before, but it was set up like a movie set. I got there with my friends early before there was more than a smattering of people. And it was still daylight, and there was an already destroyed cop car, windows broken out, dents in the side with like bricks and stuff around it. Every street corner around the protest route had pallets of bricks. And I'm like, who left these here? There's no construction going on in downtown Denver right now. And the whole thing after that was surreal. I noticed all the undercover cops. Sorry, one sec. I made brat buns yesterday, and my hubs is looking for them. Oops. I hope it stays on. There we go. It switched my screen, so I hope you can still see me. Anyway, and at that moment, and I had already done like Occupy Wall Street and several environmental protests. I really thought I was doing something, and then I show up to that one and I was like, man, I've been doing what I'm told a lot. I need to maybe think things through a little further. And that subsequently is when I decided to listen to the people I had been told not to listen to. He's texting me. He was fussing that I was in the living room and like he couldn't be noisy. He's a noisy man. And so I'm here in the bedroom and now he's texting me. Anyway, so thank goodness for that awakening, but seeing what's been happening now with these ICE protests, and they're acting in a way that mimics what it is they're protesting. They don't want people out there checking IDs and snatching their neighbors up who have come into this country illegally when they have I don't know. And the No Kings protest, I made a short about this. I thought it was interesting that on a timeline, you get Candace getting canceled and fired for saying stuff like Christ is king and genocide is bad. But Christ is king really picked up speed. And after the revival that was sparked by Charlie Kirk's assassination, people wanted to be better people and get closer to Christ. That really picked up speed. And the answer to that was massive organized No King protests. And I was like, sure, they're telling people it's about Trump, but I think it's deeper than that. There's you can say a mantra and not intend it to mean something, but it doesn't matter your intent, it's what you're saying. So I felt like that was just I didn't think it had anything to do with Trump after the fact, and I wondered if anybody else noticed that. Well aware of the doors you open with those kinds of substances. Yep, when you open the door, they come in. Yes, I did. And I actually, in the midst of me going through all of that is when I ended up really confronted by Jesus. And I had to come to terms with the fact that Jesus was real and working in my life and living and speaking to me from my heart center. And that was I grew up sort of like I had an aversion to the word even. I went to church with a few of my friends as a kid, but my dad had a falling out with Christ and within the Masons, I think. And but you can't dabble in these sorts of things, even in the occult. Like during COVID, how I kept my house and my kids, and I was single at the time, divorced and depressed and just crushed. It all like culminated in that area or in that time frame, and I read tarot cards to people, and they paid me for it because I was good at it. It's something I did since I was a kid. I was real witchy and into the occult, but I was so spiritual, and I held the space. Um, I held that space, and that's where I was. I think it all led me to Jesus, and I feel like you can't dabble in that stuff without finding him. Hi, Mari or Mary. How do you say it? Type it phonetically for me. Yes. Praise God. Praise Jesus. Christ is King. And I love that so many people are willing to say that these days, even though Christians are being so persecuted. All right. I'm going to have to find where I was. Yes. I think I turned the page and then. So the guru of the Psychedelic Revolution, Timothy Leary, first heard about hallucinogens in 1957 from Life magazine, whose publisher, Henry Luce, was often given government acid, like many other opinion shapers, and began his career as a CIA contract employee. At a 1977 reunion of acid pioneers, Leary openly admitted, "Everything I am, I owe to the foresight of the CIA." Man, see, and if I had an encoder, which is coming, um, I would pull that up. I would dig for that quote with you guys with me. So these book clubs will improve if you guys enjoy them and stick with me. Sup, Droney? All right. In this book titled Understanding, Dr. Humphrey Osmond wrote the introduction of the principal psychedelic drugs in the 1960s was a result of the CIA investigation into its possible military use. The experiments under different code names were conducted at a more, come on, the experiments under different code names were conducted at more than 80 university campuses and involuntarily helped to popularize LSD. Thousands of university students were used as unwitting guinea pigs. Soon the students, started synthesizing their own acid. Beginning in 1962, the RAND Corporation, National Defense Research Institute of Santa Monica, California, also began a secret 4-year study in experimental psychosis as a tool for psychiatric evaluation using LSD. There is I don't know if it's PBS, but it's a Canadian, so it's not PBS, but it's a Canadian sort of like PBS documentary where they talk to some of these people who were experimented on, and they were giving such huge doses of LSD, and it just erased their brains. Just 24 hours of constant IV LSD. And I'm like, that must have been horrifying. Anyway, the evaluation using LSD, peyote, and marijuana. RAND, an outgrowth of the Wartime Strategic Bombing Survey, a cost analysis study of the psychological effects of the bombing of German population centers, is a federally funded think tank sponsored by the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the Council on Foreign Relations. The study was based on the work of psychiatrist W.H. McLaughlin, who conducted preparatory research on the long-lasting effects of LSD on certain attitudes in normals. An experimental proposal. Michael Mendocino explains this phenomenon in Fidelio magazine's Winter 92 issue. Hallucinogens have the singular effect of making the victim asocial, totally self-centered, and concerned with objects. Even the most banal objects take on the aura which Benjamin had talked about and become timeless and delusionary delusionarily profound. In other words, hallucinogens instantaneously achieve a state of mind identical to that prescribed by the Frankfurt School theories. And the population of these chemicals created a vast psychological liability for bringing those theories into practice. Thus, the situation at the beginning of the 1960s represents a brilliant re-entry point for the Frankfurt School, and it was fully exploited. One of the crowning ironies of the new generation of 1964 on is that for all its protestations of utter modernity, none of its ideas or artifacts was less than 30 years old. The political theory came completely from the Frankfurt School. Lucien Goldman, a French radical who was a visiting professor at Columbia University in 1968, was absolutely correct when he said of Herbert Marcus in 1969 that the student movements found in his works, and ultimately in his works alone, the theoretical formulation of their problems and aspirations, emphasis in original, the long hair and sandals, the free love communes, the microbiotic food, the liberated lifestyles had been designed at the turn of the century and thoroughly field tested by various Frankfurt School connected New Age social experiments. Like the Ascona Commune before 1920. See, and that's something I would pull up. We'd look at it together quick. Oh, one day I'll get better. I'll get better equipment. All right. Even Tom Hayden's defiant, never trust anyone over 30, quote, was merely a less urbane version of Rupert Brooke's 1905, quote, nobody over 30 is worth talking to. The social planners who shaped the 1960s simply relied on already available materials, taking the entire charade one step further, beyond sanity and into the world of superdrugs, to be used for behavior modification and mind control tasking, a key that would eventually allow unfettered access to the human mind. Gosh, I'm so glad that I already read that Chaos book by Tom O'Neill. That's your homework if you're into reading. Even if you're not, like, get it on audiobook or something, listen to it. It's freaking phenomenal. It is so mind-bending to read the truth in some of these instances, like that last paragraph. The social planners who shaped the 60s, like, geez, that's exactly what happened. And that's still happening. But I feel like this is the Great Awakening. We're all waking up to the fact that all our outrage has been prescribed to us. All our opinions have been methodically beat into our heads. And, but this day and age, they seem to be losing their handle on things. So to understand the roots of this charade, Jeffrey Steinberg of the Executive Intelligence Review suggested that it was necessary to go back to the immediate post-war period, when there was a concerted effort launched by the Frankfurt School and the London Tavistock Institute to use the Marxist Freudian perversion of psychology and other social sciences. See, and I read both of those books first, and then this, Freud and the Jewish mystical tradition. Both of those were like, oh my God, we all need to just find our friends and get 50 acres and just all of us garden and hunt and so forth. But even then, like, they're still spraying us. But I digress. Drug counterculture was precisely the weapon that the Frankfurt School and their fellow travelers employed over the next 50 years to create a cultural paradigm shift away from the so-called authoritarian matrix of man in the living image of God and the superiority of the Republican form of nation-state over all other forms of political organization. They transformed American culture towards an erotic, perverse matrix associated with the present politically correct tyranny of tolerance. That's such a good phrase, the tyranny of tolerance. Yeah. For dehumanizing drug abuse, sexual perversion, and the glorification of violence. For the Marxist Freudian revolutionaries of the Frankfurt School, the ultimate antidote to the hatred of Western Judeo-Christian civilization was to tear that civilization down from the inside by turning out generations of necrophiliacs. Ew. If this statement seems harsh, it does. Consider the following. In his 1948 work on the philosophy of modern music, Frankfurt School leader Theodor Adorno argued that the purpose of modern music is to literally drive the listeners insane. The Beatles. See, I'd love to live stream and have like a watch party of the Winged Beetle. You heard of that? The ties between the Beatles and Aleister Crowley. So he justified this by asserting that modern society was a hotbed of evil, authoritarianism, and potential fascism, and that only by first destroying civilization through the spread of all forms of cultural pessimism and perversity could liberation occur. On the role of modern music, he wrote, it is not that schizophrenia is directly expressed therein, but the music imprints upon itself an attitude similar to that of the mentally ill. The individual brings about his own disintegration. He imagines the fulfillment of the promise through music, but nonetheless within the realm of immediate actuality. Its concern is to dominate schizophrenic traits through the aesthetic consciousness. In so doing, it would hope to vindicate insanity as true health. Necrophilia, he added, is the ultimate expression of true health in this sick society. I wish he expounded upon that a little further. I think it's important to separate the fact that these movements were co-opted and not created by Tavistock. Correct, yeah. They picked and chose Crowley, like holy, not Crowley. Oh, okay. Yes, that's what I was thinking. I was hearing it in my own head in Ozzy's voice. All right. Erich Fromm, another leading Frankfurt School figure, devoted much of his seminal 1972 work, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, to the analysis of necrophilia, which he pronounced to be the dominant trend in modern society. Fromm defined necrophilia, this is what I was looking for, as all forms of obsession with death and destruction, particularly those with intense sexual overtones. Oh, if that's not the Epstein files. Ironically, his ostensible cure for the mass social perversion was the drug rock sex counterculture of the late 1960s. Liberation through drug abuse. Earlier in 1952, a proposal was issued to the Director of Central Intelligence outlining funding mechanisms for highly sensitive CIA research and development projects that would study the use of biological and chemical materials, such as LSD, in altering human behavior. On April 13th, 1953, MKUltra was established for the express purpose of researching and developing chemical, biological, and radiological materials to be used in clandestine operations and capable of controlling or modifying human behavior. Again, quoting Jeffrey Steinberg, as these monstrous notions of mass social engineering were being presented as the humanistic alternative to world war in the age of the atomic and hydrogen bomb, crucial projects were being launched that would shape the implementation of this brave new world and bring us today, kicking and screaming, to the world of the Aquarian conspiracy. It is noteworthy that one of the four directors of the Authoritarian Personality Project, R. Nevitt Sanford, played a pivotal role in the 1950s and 60s experimentation and eventual mass usage of psychedelic drugs. The Authoritarian Personality Project of the late 1940s was responsible for engineered the baby boomer drug rock sex counterculture. Engineering. I love finding typos. All right, let me do it again. The Authoritarian Personality Project of the late 1940s was responsible for engineering the baby boomer, drug, rock, sex counterculture of the 1960s. In 1965, Sanford wrote the foreword to Utopias, the Use and Users of LSD 25, which was published by Tavistock Publications, the publishing arm of Great Britain's preeminent psychological warfare agency, the Tavistock Institute. Tavistock directed the psychiatric division of the British Army during World War II and dispatched many of its top brainwashers to the United States in the immediate post-war period to work on the secret mind control projects of the CIA and the Pentagon, including the MKUltra project, devoted to the study of LSD and other psychedelics. And so I'm steeped in knowledge of the MKUltra project, but we need to look into Often and Artichoke as projects. Okay. In his foreword to Utopias, Sanford, who headed up the Sanford University Institute for the Study of Human Problems, a major outpost for MKUltra, secret LSD experimentation. The nation, Sanford wrote, seems to be fascinated by our 40,000 or so drug addicts who are seen as alarmingly wayward people who must be curbed at all costs by expensive police activity. Only an uneasy Puritanism could support the practice of focusing on the drug addicts rather than our 5 million alcoholics, and in treating them as a police problem instead of a medical one, while suppressing harmless drugs such as marijuana and peyote along with the dangerous ones. Lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, was developed in 1943 by Albert Hofmann, a chemist at Sandoz AB, a Swiss pharmaceutical house owned by S.G. Warburg. LSD's principal component is ergotamine tartrate, which Hofmann turned into synthetic ergotamine, a powerful mind-altering and highly addictive drug. Looking deeper into the LSD history, we discover that while precise documentation is unavailable as to the auspices under which the LSD research was commissioned, it can be safely assumed that British intelligence and its subsidiary U.S. Office of Strategic Services were directly involved. Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA when the agency began MKUltra, was the OSS station chief in Bern, Switzerland, throughout the early Sandoz research. One of his OSS assistants was James Warburg of the same Warburg family, who was instrumental in 1963 funding of the Institute of Policy Studies and worked with both Huxley and Robert Hutchins. All in all, there were 149 MKUltra subprojects, many of them involved with research into behavior modification, hypnosis, drug effects, psychotherapy, truth serums, pathogens, and toxins in human tissues. For intelligence purposes, what was required of MKUltra was the ability to manipulate memory. Thus, what the Freudians call the superego, Peter Levenda explains in Sinister Forces, had to be bypassed, allowing the controller direct access to the contents of the enemy agent's mind. That was step one. Step two would involve erasing specific pieces of information from the subject's memory and replacing those pieces with new bits of memory, thus permitting the agency to send that agent back into the field without any knowledge that he or she had been interrogated and had given up sensitive information. Step three was a potential bonus. Could that enemy agent be programmed to commit acts on behalf of the agency without knowing who gave the command or why? This was the essence of the Manchurian Candidate. It is also the essence of what we know today as hypnotherapy and depth psychoanalysis. For the psychiatrist is looking for access to the patient's unconscious layers to extract important information such as childhood trauma and to neutralize the effects of that trauma. In some cases, replacing certain behavior patterns with new approved patterns. Mary, good to meet you. Thank you for commenting. I like your screen name. Screen name, did I just date myself? delving back into my AOL chat rooms. All right. Could the enemy be programmed? Depth psychoanalysis, yes. Looking for access to the patient's unconscious level. Okay. In some cases, replacing certain behavior patterns with new approved patterns. Did I not read that last bit? The proximate origins of these actions go back to an overtly satanic turn in the 19th century Romantic movement. Notably, the exemplary connection of Britain's H.G. Wells. Oh, I love H.G. Wells. Like his Peas commercial, he was hammered. Anyway, it was funny. So the exemplary connection of Britain's H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, and theosophist leader Aleister Crowley in the role of Aldous Huxley in the promotion of what were originally known as psychotomimetic, psychosis imitating, or psychedelic drugs. This connection exposes the satanic quality of the work of Aldous Huxley et al. And everybody else they just listed, I'm assuming, in the preparation of what emerged as rock, drug, sex culture, counterculture in the 1960s. Crowley and Capri resident Askell Muenth were the Menth, maybe? Where is it? Right there. Muenth were the leading figures of the Satan Antichrist cult of theosophy during the beginning of 20th century. The publication of the pro-satanic periodical Lucifer in Vienna, with participation of Crowley, is exemplary. The role of Maxim Gorky in the Grotto of Capri was part of the pre-World War I activity of those pro-satanic circles. The composer Richard Wagner and the existentialist Friedrich Nietzsche were key figures in the Antichrist movement. Wow. For Muenth et al., the original Antichrist was the Emperor Tiberius, whose son-in-law, Pontius Pilate, executed Jesus Christ. This was the circle into which Aldous and Julian Huxley were introduced by H.G. Wells and Bertrand Russell during the late 1920s and early 30s. Notably, the Josiah Marcy Jr. Foundation of the 1940s and 50s served as one of the principal covens where the architects of the 1960s rock, drug, sex, youth counterculture often met. All right. Painting the anti-war movement as a scourge in society was the main point of a lot of this. That means modern authors ignore what? That these modern authors ignore. Well, maybe he'll get to that. Because was it anti-war, or were they trying to usurp anti-war movements? Because he said that they were making them incredibly self-centered and, gosh, my hair. I was going to straighten it, but then I was like, I'll just blow dry it and see what happens. And this happens. Anyway, sorry. It was rather vain. I'm embarrassed. All right. I just don't often see myself until I started doing all this. All right, mass psychology model. The counterculture model that the British had imposed on the United States was based on the pagan ceremonies of ancient Egyptian and Roman empires. And when you study things in the Rosicrucians, which I was a part of for a little over a year, or the Masons, you are learning the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, what they taught. And it was spooky. I'll have to come on here and do like a live stream where I go over it. I still have some of the literature, and we'll talk about that. I wonder if I do enough of a heads up that I'm going to do that, if other Rosicrucians or ex-Rosicrucians will come on and talk about it. So the counterculture model that the British had imposed on the United States. Oh, yeah. And these had a history of their own. The continuity of the cult of Apollo is important to this point. There was black nobility families of Rome whose families and family political traditions trace back to the Roman Republic. The Republican Empire under which their ancestors lived was in turn controlled by a Rome branch of the cult of Apollo. That cult was during that time variously the chief usurious debt farming institution of the Mediterranean region. I'm holding there. I want to pull this up because when I was trying to look into Erica Kirk's real estate career in New York, I found something, the only thing, because she had no sales. And you're supposed to, when you get your real estate license, it's supposed to be published somewhere. Yeah, let's look up Erica. But somebody had put together this delving sort of infographic, and you see it's the Apollo cult there, and it shows pyramids 888, and this says Erica Kirk works as a real estate agent at the Cochrane Group in New York, affiliated with Realogy Holding Corp. Is now called Anywhere Real Estate Inc. And its owner is the private equity firm Apollo Management. Apollo Global Management shareholders include major investment firms like the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, Joshua Harris, ex-Christian turned, and Mark Rowan, a rabbi. I guess that's all I screenshotted it, but then I guess maybe the way that I saved it, the next infographic, I wish I could find it in my mess of, I've got 60,000 photos on here, which is not conducive to, it's not organized. Anyway, noteworthy. And every time they've mentioned it in this book, I keep thinking about that. So yes, I would love to share it. Because it was definitely spooky, and it was so in your face spooky that I often felt as if somebody was in the room with me. And you kind of, I'll get into it later. But stay tuned because I do want to do that. I want to get into that big time. So from the death of Alexander the Great until the cult of Apollo dissolved itself into the cult of Stoicism, it had, I love Stoic concepts too. It's helped me sort of like relax on certain triggers and stuff. And okay. From the death of Alexander the Great until the cult of Apollo dissolved itself into the cult of Stoicism, it had created during the 2nd century BC, the base of the cult was Ptolemaic Egypt, from which the cult controlled Rome. In Egypt, the cult of Apollo syncretized the cult of Isis and Osiris as the direct imitation of the Phrygian cult of Dionysus, and the Roman imitation, the cult of Bacchus. It was there that the cult of Stoic irrationalism was created by the cult of Apollo. It was the cult of Apollo that created the Roman Empire, which created the Roman law on the basis of the anti-humanistic Aristotelian Nicomachean ethics. Wow. That was just an intense sentence. So that is the tradition which the old Black Roman families transmit. These Roman families over time became known as the Venetian Black nobility, and today their members hold key positions within the inner circle of organizations such as the Bilderberg Group. And that was the other book he wrote, the Bilderberg Group, the true story of. Excuse me. That tradition persisted under various institutional covers, always preserving the essential world outlook and doctrine intact. You see. That's okay. Hi, Ricky. Good to see you. That would be interesting. Yes. Good to see you, though. All right. The British monarchy, the parasitic aristocratic landlord class of Britain, and the British-dominated feudalist factions of the Maltese order are the modern concentrated expression of the unbroken tradition and policies of the ancient Apollo cult. And it is not shocking to me that Erica has been tied into that. The Aristotelian, there's probably a much more eloquent way to pronounce that, knows that the generalized scientific and technological progress, given the conditions of education and liberty of innovation, which progress demands, produces in the citizen a dedication to the creative potential of the human mind, which is antithetical to the oligarchical system. He has given me a mouth workout. What the Aristotelians have hated and feared down through the millennia is their knowledge that persistent, generalized scientific and technological progress as the dirigiste policy of society. Just so you know what I'm struggling with, dirigiste means a republican hegemony which ends forever the possibility of establishing oligarchical world rule. They have restored to the same methods used by the ancient priests of Apollo, the promotion of Dionysian cults, of drug cultures, orgiastic erotic countercultures, deranged mobs of machine breakers, and terrorist maniacs, to turn such a combined force of demented rabble against those forces in society that are dedicated to scientific and technological progress. Pardon me. The following description of cult ceremonies dating back to the Egyptian Isis priesthood of the 3rd millennium BC could just as well be a journalistic account of a hippie be-in circa AD 1969. The acts or gestures that accompany the incantations constitute the rite of Isis. In these dances, the beating of drums and the rhythm of music and repetitive movements were helped by hallucinatory substances like hashish or mescal. They were consumed by adjuvants to create the trance and the hallucinations that were taken to be visitations from God. The drugs were sacred and their knowledge was limited to the initiated, possibly because they have the illusion of satisfied desires and allowed the innermost feelings to escape. These rites acquired during their execution a frenzied character that is conspicuous in certain spells. Quote, retreat, is piercing thy head, slashing thy face, dividing thy head, crushing it in his hands. Thy bones are shattered, thy limbs are cut to pieces. Oh, Ricky, you're so sweet. You're so stinking sweet. Thank you. Oh my goodness. God, I need to learn how to process this. And I need to not like friggin' cry always. I feel it coming. You're so wonderful and so generous. Thank you so much. You blow me away, and that kind of support, you're going to help me get a better YouTube channel going, and then I'm going to blame you. I'll send everybody, well, you are on the internet infamously sweet. Thank you. Let me find my way. Oh, it's fine. I'm still at the top of the page. You're wonderful. Thank you. So, firstly, Isis is a drug cult. It is a cult of high priests and secret rituals. These secret rituals have been kept inside the British royal family and their ruling class friends for centuries. The cult was practiced in Egypt during the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom, circa 2780 BC. Isis worship is essentially pagan, primitive mother worship. The Isis priesthood is a closed circle, and its nobility practiced social control, total subjugation of man's free will, exploitation and subjugation of people. The Isis cult was popularized minus its secrets by Isis high priest Bulwer Lytton's work. The Last Days of Pompeii. Bulwer Lutin. So Bulwer Lytton and then Bulwer Lytton. So you see, I am not messing it up. He messed it up. Another typo. His son, Edward, was Viceroy and Governor General of India from 1876 through 1880, when exports of Bengal opium to China were greatly stepped up. Bulwer Lytton, maybe it's Lytton, was the mentor of Lord Palmerston, who led the British Parliament during the Opium Wars that forced an unwilling China to not only continue, but also expand the sale of opium in that country. Russian occultist Madame Blavatsky further popularized the cult of ISIS through her book, ISIS Unveiled. That all made me, the Opium Wars, that all made me think of how 9/11, which I feel like in hindsight was a mass killing, social engineering experiment project, ended with us. They said it was the Saudis. We ended up in Iraq and then Afghanistan. We had soldiers protecting poppy fields. Interesting, huh? It is. Isn't it wonderful? I love you people that end up here in my chat. I'm so glad that I started doing this because I'm exposed to real thoughtful humans, and I have been surrounded by NPCs or non-playable characters for so long who are just content with, you know who I'm talking about. And I'm so glad y'all are here with me. So, Lord Bertrand Russell, who joined the Frankfurt School in this effort at mass social engineering for the purpose of destroying man's creative powers, as well as wreck European and American cultures, spilled the beans in his 1951 book, The Impact of Science on Society. He wrote, quote, "Physiology and psychology afford fields for scientific technique, which still await development. Two great men, Pavlov and Freud, have laid the foundation. I do not accept the view that they are in any essential conflict, but that structure will be built on their foundations is still in doubt." What structure will be built on their foundations is still in doubt. I think the subject and it turns out that the whole education system is built on Freud's foundational work. I think the subject will be of the most importance politically is mass psychology. Its importance has been enormously increased by the growth of modern methods of propaganda. Of these, the most influential is what is called education. It's almost like I read that already. I didn't. So religion plays a part through a diminishing one. The press, the cinema, and the radio play an increasing part. It may be hoped that in time anybody will be able to persuade anybody of anything if we can catch the patient young and is provided by the state with money and equipment, calling the people in general who they intend to manipulate the patient. And that's the goal these days, to keep everybody sick enough to be dependent upon the medical industry. All right, Russell continues. The subject will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. I'm going to read that again because that sounds important. So, the social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. And they do that, man. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of home is obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. Ain't that the truth? Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. Those dang conspiracy theorists. But I anticipate it is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost to make them believe it is dark gray. Russell concluded with a warning: although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. That itself sounds like a quote from the protocols. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. The Russells, an English noble family, came into their own during the reign of Henry VIII. Earl Bertrand Russell was the grandson of Lord John Russell, 1798 through 1878, twice prime minister during the reign of Queen Victoria. Enter Aldous Huxley. It was Lord Russell who proposed the development of mass drugging of populations as method of social control through decriminalization of marijuana and other dangerous psychotropic drugs and the modification of the use of language to provide methods of mass social manipulation or linguistics. The drug side of the Russell Project was picked up chiefly by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was a grandson of the famous biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, whose outspoken support of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution earned him the nickname Darwin's Bulldog. It was Thomas Huxley, a leading member of the Metaphysical Society, which was founded in 1869 in an attempt to forge a more effective intellectual elite out of the membership of the Oxford Essayists and Cambridge Apostles, who coined the term agnosticism. Huxley and his leading circles denied the ability of man to actually know anything. The so-called no-soul doctrine was at the heart of Wells's book, Open Conspiracy. Are we talking H.G. Wells? Is that an H.G. Wells book? Can anybody Google that quick? Unlike his grandfather, Aldous Huxley was a novelist who liked to experiment with drugs to discover his inner creativity and spiritual connection. Drugs, more than evangelists, he believed, had the psychedelic power to tap into a spiritual well of visions. Even a fleeting experience of self-transcendence could shatter society's traditional way of thinking about religion in each person's pursuit of a deeper and more meaningful spiritual life. Huxley predicted that religion would be transformed from an activity mainly concerned about symbols to an activity mainly concerned with experience and intuition, driven by mystical inspiration. It all went back to Thomas Huxley's basic teaching. The unifying theme was the denial of the nobility of man, as expressed in the provable power of the human mind to create and discover new ideas. Aldous Huxley was a lifelong collaborator of Arnold Joseph Toynbee, an economic historian whose 12-volume analysis of the rise and fall of civilizations examined history from a global perspective. See you later. Thanks for tuning in, Trony. All right. Huxley met Toynbee at Oxford, where he was touted by H.G. Wells. It must be. That's who the Wells is. Yeah. Oh, that stuff is scary. Salvia. Okay. Sorry. While Wells went, nope. Huxley met Toynbee at Oxford, where he was tutored by H.G. Wells, who was T.H. Huxley's protege. While Wells went on to become the head of British Foreign Intelligence during World War I, Toynbee sat on the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIAA Council in Chatham House, interlocked with the CFR in the United States, for nearly 50 years. During World War I, he also headed the research division of the Intelligence Department for the British Foreign Office and was a delegate to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. From 1925 to 1955, he served as the Director of Studies at the RIAA, and then during World War II, he became Prime Minister Winston Churchill's briefing officer. In an excellent investigative report on the Aquarian conspiracy, Executive Intelligence Review staff explain that Toynbee's theory of history, quote, expounded on his 20-volume History of Western Civilization, was that its determining culture has always been the rise and decline of grand imperial dynasties. At the very point that these dynasties, the thousand-year Reich of the Egyptian pharaohs, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, succeeded in imposing their rule over the entire face of the earth, they tended to decline. I'm on what?
On the physical quantum jump show.
Oh, good. Good for you, babe.
Finally.
Awesome. I'm in a house full of gamers. And he had a mouthful trying to tell me about his win. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. They tend to decline. Toynbee argued that this decline could be abated if the ruling oligarchy, like that of the British Round Table, would devote itself to the recruitment and training of an ever-expanding priesthood dedicated to the principles of imperial rule. Whereas Toynbee, Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, is great. He wrote it after taking mescaline, and it's a classic psychonaut book. Interesting. I know I've read Huxley's books, but it's been years. I think 20 years or so. And I read so much, it's hard to recall. All right, the ruling oligarchy, like that, blah, 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 blah. Whereas Toynbee appeals to the highbrow intellects of the British aristocracy, Wells' science fiction stories had squarely positioned him as a pop star of the time. According to Wells, world revolution was only attainable through open conspiracy, blueprint for a world revolution, using counterculture as a battering ram on an unsuspecting public. Wells wrote, "It will appear first, I believe, as a conscious organization of intelligent and quite possibly in some cases wealthy men, as a movement having distinct social and political aims, confessedly ignoring most of the existing apparatus of political control, or using it only as an incidental implement on the stages. A mere movement of a number of people in a certain direction who will presently discover with a sort of surprise the common object towards which they are all moving. In all sorts of ways, they will be influencing and controlling the apparatus of the ostensible government." From his experience as one of the initiates in the Children of the Sun, a Dionysian cult comprised of the children of Britain's Round Table elite, Aldous Huxley gained material to create his most famous novel, Brave New World. That's the one that I read. I think that's the only one I read. Although Doors of Perception does sound familiar, but I read a Jim Morrison autobiography. Oh, that was No One Here Gets Out Alive, where he talks about Huxley's book. What is that? I apologize if you can hear that. Somebody's using some kind of air sprayer. We are painting. I don't know if you've been here with me long enough, you know that I've been painting like windowsills and different things. We're going to do the walls here soon. All right. Okay. I apologize for being late. Yeah. I'm going to eat mushrooms. Are those the red and whites? Santa Claus ones? Leave presents under the pine trees because they grow under the pine. Anyway, so from, Brave New World, published in 1931. Brave New World is a virtual blueprint of a true life future, one world socialist government, or as his Fabian mentor H.G. Wells paraphrased the title for one of his own popular books, The New World Order, 1940, The Open Conspiracy, Blueprint of a World Revolution, 1928, which openly examines how the New World Order could be attained ostensibly for world peace and human evolution. Remember the goal of H.G. Wells. Russell, Huxley, and company is the destruction of the sovereign power of the nation state, and with it, the elimination of a philosophical, come on, philosophical, what is wrong with me? The cultural and religious traditions dating more than 2,500 years. I just got a bunch, because I'm helping my mom move, I got a bunch of my dad's sci-fi books, and there are some Asimov or something. Oh, H.G. Wells and so forth. I wonder. All right. I haven't been able to dig through them. They're all in boxes, all dusty and whatnot. So what is that? So what is it that makes an open conspiracy open, as in placed there in plain sight for everyone to see? Larry Hecht explains. What makes the open conspiracy open is not the laying out of some secret master plan, not the revealing of the membership roster of some inner sanctum of the rich and powerful, which the typical deluded populace supposes to be the secret power in the world. It is rather the understanding that ideas, philosophy, and culture control history. What constitutes a conspiracy for good or evil is a set of ideas which embody a concept of what it is to be human and a concept of man's role in universal history. Asimov is good. I know, and I've got a bunch of signed first editions, and if one of them is that, I don't know what I'll do. I'll certainly have my own full-blown room for streaming. My kids will go to college if they want to. I don't quite want them to. I want to build a business alongside them that they can learn through practical application, doing, rather than going and getting indoctrinated in some re-education camp. All right. What constitutes a conspiracy for good or evil is a set of ideas which embody a concept of what it is to be human. I read that. A concept of man's role in universal history. It was H.G. Wells who introduced Huxley to Satanist Aleister Crowley. Crowley was a poster child of the occult that developed in Britain from the 1860s under the influence of Edward Bulwer Lytton. So it was Lytton twice now and Lytton twice now. So unless that's two different dudes, I don't think so. I think he's just, he writes like I do. I have typos and so forth. And sometimes I rest on misspellings, knowing I'm misspelling it. So the colonial minister under Lord Palmerston during the Second Opium War period. In 1886, Crowley, William Butler Yeats, poet and Nobel Prize winner, and several other Bulwer Lytton proteges formed a satanic Isis Urania temple of Hermetic students of the Golden Dawn. This Isis cult was organized around the 1877 manuscript Isis unveiled by Madame Helena Blavatsky, in which the Russian occultist called for the British aristocracy to organize itself into its Isis priesthood. I hope my stuttering and stammering doesn't make it hard for you to stay with me here. Anyway, I guess that's what you get when it's not AI or when it's me. So, Crichton Zokos explains that among the other initiates in the Children of the Sun were T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Sir Oswald Mosley, and D.H. Lawrence, Huxley's homosexual lover. It was Huxley, furthermore, who would launch the legal battle in the 1950s to have Lawrence's pornographic novel, Lady Chatterley's Lover, allowed into the United States on the grounds that it was misunderstood work of art. In A Brave New World, Huxley centers on the scientific methodology for keeping all populations outside the elite minority in a permanently autistic-like condition, actually in love with their servitude. Speaking at the California Medical School in San Francisco, Huxley announced, quote, "There will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak." producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological needs. Oh, thank you. And this seems to be the final revolution. To Wells's way of thinking, this wasn't a conspiracy, but rather a one-world brain functioning as a police of the mind. In a speech on the U.S. Department Voice of America in 1961, Huxley spoke of a world of pharmacologically manipulated slaves living in a concentration camp of the mind. Oh, this is breaking my heart. The last word. Enhanced by propaganda and psychotropic drugs. Learning to love their servitude and abandoning all will to resist. This, Huxley concluded, is the final revolution. Oh, are we there right now? Huxley's cohort in the 1950s experimentation with psychotropic drugs, Dr. Timothy Leary of Harvard University's psychology department, provided another glimpse into the perverted minds of Russell Huxley Frankfurt School crowd in Flashback, his autobiographical account of the Harvard University Psychedelic Drug Project. Leary quoted Huxley, quote, "These brain drugs, mass-produced in laboratories, will bring about vast changes in society. This will happen with or without you or me. All we can do is spread the word. The obstacles to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible." Leary then added, "We had run up against the Judeo-Christian commitment to one God, one religion, one reality that has cursed Europe for centuries and America since our founding days. Drugs that open the mind to multiple realities inevitably lead to polytheistic view of the universe. We sense that the time for a new humanist religion based on intelligence, good-natured pluralism, and scientific paganism has arrived." And that makes me think of how Jesus, the parable about the one sheep running astray from the flock, he goes after the one sheep, and the rest rejoice when he comes back with the sheep that went astray. Huxley at work. Man, I still got a ways to go, y'all. We're about halfway, though, I think. A little under halfway. I'll keep going. Is that real? Let me see. Okay. Huxley at work. In 1954, Huxley published a study of consciousness expansion through mescaline, The Doors of Perception, the first manifesto of the psychedelic drug cult. The Doors, a rock band, borrowed their name from the Psychedelic Manifesto. Huxley borrowed the title from William Blake's poem, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, all things would appear infinite." In 1958, Aldous Huxley assembled a number of essays that he had written for Newsday and published them collectively as Brave New World Revisited, in which he described a society where the first aim of the rulers is, at all costs, to keep their subjects from making trouble. He described a likely future, quote, "the completely organized society, the abolition of free will, by methodical conditioning, the servitude made acceptable by regular doses of chemically induced happiness." He also predicted democracies would change their nature. Quaint old forms, elections, parliaments, supreme courts will remain, but the underlying substance will be nonviolent totalitarianism. Democracy and freedom will be the theme of every broadcast and editorial, but democracy and freedom in a strictly Pickwickian, i.e., not literal sense. I'm glad he immediately defined Pickwickian. Meanwhile, the ruling oligarchy and its highly trained elite of soldiers, policemen, thought manufacturers, and mind manipulators will quietly run the show as they see fit. How different is it from what we have today? This is the Protocols Manifest. This is 50 years after the protocols. 50, 60 years. The roots of the flower people. Back in California, Gregory Bateson had maintained the Huxley operation out of the Palo Alto VA hospital. Bateson, one of the most colorful characters of the epoch, was former husband and anthropologist of Margaret Mead. Bateson himself, a renowned anthropologist with the OSS, became the director of the hallucinogenic drug experimental clinic at the Palo Alto Veterans Administration Hospital. Under Bateson's auspices, the initiating cadre of the LSD cult, the hippies, were programmed. Through LSD experimentation on patients already hospitalized for psychological problems, Bateson established a core of initiates into the psychedelic ISIS cult. Here is a bit of what Michael Mendocino of the Campaigners' April 1974 issue had to say. Foremost, quote, foremost among his Palo Alto recruits was Ken Kesey. In 1959, Bateson administered the first dose of LSD to Kesey. By 1962, Kesey had completed a novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which popularized the notion that society is a prison and the only truly free people are the insane. It is worth noting that during the 1960s, the Tavistock Clinic fostered the notion that no criteria for sanity exists and that psychedelic mind-expanding drugs are valuable tools of psychoanalysis. Kesey subsequently organized a circle of LSD initiates called the Merry Pranksters. I know all about them. This goofy band toured the United States spreading LSD and establishing the pretext for a high volume of publicity on behalf of the still minuscule counterculture. Mendocino's report continued. By 1967, the Kesey cult had handed out such quantities of LSD that a sizable drug population, flower children, had emerged. Centered in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, here Huxley collaborator Bateson set up a free clinic staffed by Dr. David Smith, later a medical advisor for the National Organization of the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, and Dr. Peter Bourne, formerly President Carter's special assistant on drug abuse. I want to get personal with you right now. In 2006, moved into an apartment across the street from a well-known hippie bar called Sancho's Broken Arrow, across from the Fillmore in downtown Denver. I had been assaulted of the S variety so many times that I couldn't count. It was after this part of my life that I ended up turning to marijuana, psilocybin, and stuff, trying to heal my brains after such repetitive trauma. I had been told when I moved into the city of Denver to find the hippies, that they would take care of me. And what I came to believe after the fact, and I was also in a 9/11 fact check group around that time, and I had been confronted in the local bar saying, you better watch what you're doing and what you're saying to people. And then I had been repeatedly roofied, and with what that comes with. The bar owner, Bianchi, is now in prison for doing what he was doing to all of us girls. And I even had a mugshot because of my turbulent past. I got in some DUIs. I was very much poorly coping. And it was hanging up in the men's room. And it almost felt like there was a menu of who these gentlemen could get these GHB type substances and then partake in. And it felt very much like this substance was being poured into the city and handed to all these frustrated young men who couldn't approach a woman to save their lives. And that's what I'm thinking about with this. They dosed a culture with LSD. They dosed a culture with crack They've dosed a culture. They keep dosing us. And I was just thinking that when I was reading, so I wanted to share it. And I know my experience isn't unique to me, but I know that it is super foreign to a lot of folks. Like, how could that happen? How could you have such numbers of instances that have happened to you? But it's true. And this makes it make more sense because it was a deadhead bar. And he had to have been getting these substances from somebody. It's not like they were hanging out with chemists. Pagan connection. No? Yet, it was not until the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement that really created the climate of moral despair and the rot that spurred American youth to rely on drugs. In other words, the war was used as a backdrop against which to create the anti-war movement. Their disillusionment with the war made the protesters easy prey for their masters to condition them under the guidance of the Tavistock Institute and the CIA through the influence of the LSD drug culture. I forget who he was talking about. Joe Kent was on Tucker last night talking about his experience, and Tucker sidebarred kind of a conversation about how Walter Cronkite was blamed for the end or the loss of the Vietnam War. So that's interesting that they're saying that the anti-war movement was manufactured. So their disillusionment with the war made the protesters easy prey for their masters to condition them under the guidance of the... I read that already, I'm sorry. I'm not suggesting that most anti-war protesters were paid agents for the elite circles. On the contrary, as Crichton Zaukost, right there, Zaukost, suggests, the overwhelming majority of anti-war protesters went into the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS organization, on the basis of outrage at the developments in Vietnam. But once caught in the environment defined by the Tavistock Institute, psychological warfare experts, and inundated with the messages that hedonistic pleasure-seeking was a legitimate alternative to immoral war, the protesters' sense of values and their creative potential went up in a cloud of hashish smoke. The outcome of this debacle was a major strategic withdrawal from Asia by the United States, spelled out in Henry Kissinger. I just realized it's been an hour and 20 minutes. Maybe I should cut at the end of this and we'll pick up again tomorrow because there's still a lot left. The outcome of this debacle was a major strategic withdrawal from Asia by the United States, spelled out in Henry Kissinger's Guam Doctrine, adoption of the spectacular failure known as the China Card, strategy for containing Soviet influence, and demoralization of the American people over the war to the point that the sense of national pride and confidence in the future progress of the Republic was badly damaged. The moral despair is what the Frankfurt School had hoped for back when they were looking for new cultural forms to increase the alienation of the population. They found in it newly created Rockefeller Tavistock-sponsored and financed organization, IPS, the Institute for Policy Studies. I'm going to stop there. I've got to go help my mom. We're halfway through chapter 4. Thank you for being here, for listening to me. I went off and spilled some of my personal tea. Thank you. I will take them. And I definitely don't share these things about myself so that you feel sorry for me, because I'm a champ. I'm a good mom. I've got a good life. And I'm hoping just to hold the space to have honest conversations, and we can touch the untouchable and talk about the unthinkable and thought crimes and so forth. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow for the rest of chapter 4. Bye, guys. Thank you, Ricky.